So my name's Cal. I'm the produce safety guy with K-State. My background is in open field cultivation and implementing food safety practices into operations. Today is an intro broad stroke, and then we'll introduce you to some other trainings we offer through the university. I cannot see if you have questions, so feel free to unmute yourself and just chime in. I tend to take an informal approach. All right. So why food safety? As the grower, you want to provide products as safe as possible. You want to reduce liability to your markets and assure customers the product is quality, safe, and their health is important to you. Also, if any regulations apply to you, for those of you who want to do USDA GAP audits or other third party, or for those of you that fall under the produce safety rule. Food safety can improve quality and shelf life as well. Temperature control, sanitation, more pounds of product to sell, reducing water loss, and preventing early spoilage. These are estimates from the CDC on 1 in 6. 48 million get sick, 128,000 hospitalized, 3,000 deaths. This is highly underreported. It does occur in small scale ag as well as large scale ag. Outbreaks continue to occur. It affects markets and reduces consumer confidence, especially in the era of social media. Anytime consumers get on there and said, my child got horrifically sick eating produce from this city's farmer's market, that will have a direct effect on all the growers. Populations most vulnerable to foodborne illness are the young, old, pregnant, and sick. Certifications and regulations for produce safety. What are GAPs and being GAP certified? Good agricultural practices or GAPs. That's just a reference term. Farms that do these practices often say, we follow GAP practices, but that is not the same as being GAP certified. GAP certification is through a third party, USDA, Global GAP, Primus, etc. That is not a regulatory requirement. It is typically market and buyer driven. FSMA, on the other hand, the Food Safety Modernization Act, has multiple components. The one we're focused on is the produce safety rule. If you are a covered farm, you have to follow the regulations. On our website, if you just Google produce safety K-State, that will take you to our website. There is a 7-minute video on there from the University of Minnesota that walks through coverage, exemptions, and status. I highly encourage you to look at that and reference it for future. The final rule was released in November of 2015. It focused on growing, harvesting, packing, and holding of produce. It was the first ever government regulation for production, harvest, and handling of fruits and vegetables. It is very similar to USDA GAPs, but they do have differences. If you sell less than $25,000 a year in produce sales, on average the previous 3 years, you are not covered by the rule. Produce that is rarely consumed raw, pumpkins, are not covered under the rule. Produce that will be commercially processed before consumption, tomatoes sold to a canner, not covered. Qualified exemptions are a little more complicated. It takes food sales and who you're selling them to into consideration. And again, the video will work you through this process. The nice thing is you can hit pause, rewind, and it has some great examples. Everyone else is covered. There is no exemption if your farm's linked to a foodborne disease outbreak. Compliance dates, as you can see, as of January 26th of 2020, everyone is required to be compliant that the rule applies to. Water requirements within the training, for those of you that have done it, there is an additional 4 years beyond these compliance dates. In Kansas and Missouri started inspections in Kansas. That's all to be determined with all this COVID stuff going on, so I'm not going to get into the mud there. So the produce safety rule is similar to GAPs. It covers the main areas: agricultural water, biological soil amendments, domesticated and wild animals, worker training, health and hygiene, equipment, tools, buildings, and sanitation, and the growing, harvesting, packing, and holding. They align. The number I always hear, I have no idea where it came from, was 85%. I don't disagree with that. They align significantly, but there are key differences. If you're going to be covered under the FSMA produce safety rule, you are required to go to a one-day training. This is regardless if you are GAP certified, have completed this training, have other certifications, etc. There are annual food safety training requirements for workers within the produce safety rule. The big picture. This is what the rule focuses on. It is all about risk reduction, identifying probable causes that can contaminate your farm and taking steps to mitigate risk. The name of the game is prevention, because once contamination's there, it's very hard to remove. This is just a visual example. They put all the complications possible on this. My hope is no one has a farm that meets these specific criteria. But you can see towards the south of the image, wildlife outside of the field. The northwest, anyone that's near a concentrated feed operation, that can have significant risks, especially if the topography is lower, your wind pattern, your rain pattern. These are things that it's good to know. And if you ever have technical questions too on the Kansas side, feel free to reach out to me directly. There's going to be contact information at the end for myself and the Missouri equivalent. Birds are always a concern, animals, water sources. Like I said, it's just a visual to show you things to consider. Soil amendments. Raw manure and other soil amendments can be a source of contamination if not properly handled and applied. So what we're talking about there, for those of you who are familiar with organic, where they follow the 90 and 120 day, that is for tree fruit and stuff that grows off the ground. When you apply and incorporate a soil amendment, you're waiting 90 days until harvest. Stuff that grows on the ground, we're talking about 120 days. If you're treating your manures, and a caveat there is aged and stacked manure is not a treatment process. If you're treating your amendment correctly, there are different guidelines. The other things to consider are runoff, wind spread, and cross-contamination due to improper sanitation. Right now, the 90, 120 days is the current guidance that everyone follows. Keep records of your temps and turnings. This is if you want to consider your compost treated. On our website, there are fact sheets and handouts that detail the different treatment methods that have already been validated that you can follow. And try to keep pets and wildlife outside of your pile so they don't recontaminate the treated pile. Ag water. Where do you use water in your produce operation? How can you reduce potential contamination? Ag water has the ability to take a very small contamination risk and make it widespread. If you think back to the leafy green outbreak last year, Arizona, that area, that is most likely the surface water they're using to do overhead irrigation of the lettuce. So that's just to give you an example of water spreading contamination. The other times I've seen them, some out of Michigan with the apples, it's when they're fluming them in the tank. They're basically floating them down this water post-harvest. If you're not properly managing that water, you're going to take a small contamination event and put it on all your apples. So water can carry and spread pathogens. The areas you want to focus on as the grower is your production water and post-harvest water. Production is specifically how you irrigate the crop. Also, any nutrients, foliar sprays, crop sprays, frost protection, etc. Post-harvest is after you've harvested the produce. Are you washing it, dump tanking it in a Rubbermaid tote, a 3-bay sink? Anything you're doing with water is the post-harvest concern. And then always be conscious of unexpected events, flooding or runoff, which we had a significant amount of last year in Kansas. So here's your risk from your 3 different sources. Public water supply is treated, that's the low risk. Groundwater falls right in the middle. That has a lot of factors: the condition of the well, how deep it is, your topography, what's northeast, southwest of you, are there concentrated animals above you, especially if shallow wells, etc. And then surface water, which is open to the environment, is the highest risk. A good place to start is to test all your sources. If you're using municipal water, just the results from the city test will suffice. Wells and surface water get tested. We are offering this through in both Kansas and Missouri, and there's some slides at the end to tell you how to go about doing that. Production water will need to meet the recreational water quality. In post-harvest water, we're talking potable, no detectable generic E. coli, 100 milliliter water sample. Domesticated and wild animals. A mistake that people make here is they think if they're using an animal for a farm purpose that it follows different guidelines. If you are using cats in a field or high tunnel for rodent or vermin control, the same rules as wildlife would apply to your domesticated cat. They do not differentiate between the risks from your cat than the deer or the rodents or the voles. Animals can carry and transmit human pathogens to produce. That's why we're concerned about them. So prevention measures, monitoring, steps taken if there's intrusion or possible contamination, and not harvesting produce that is visibly contaminated with feces or likely to have been contaminated. Minimizing animal contamination and crop damage. Decoys, I was on an interesting call with some folks out in Arizona, and they said decoys, if you do not move them every 2 to 4 hours, wildlife adapts that quickly. The picture up by the coyote decoy is deer fencing that's staggered at different heights. The deer have a hard time gauging the depths and tend to stay away from it. The top right, you'll see bird netting and then just other physical decoys. The deer in the bottom right, what you have to be careful about there is anything under 6 feet, they're going to jump. So if you have a 6-foot fence, you need to make sure it's well maintained and 6 foot all the way across. There's nothing worse than Bambi getting in and not being able to get out. Harvesting, so we're talking about pre-plant and pre-harvest assessments. You don't have to overcomplicate that. When you're going to harvest an area, it's just about doing a field scout. You're looking for tracks, feces, feeding, any potential contaminants to the produce is all you want to be identifying before you're working. Attempt to keep produce cool, especially quickly after harvest. This will help you with your post-harvest quality as well. Harvest containers and tools. Make sure to clean and sanitize. Cleaning and sanitizing are a different process. The simplest way to think about it is after you eat dinner and have your dirty plates, you would sponge them with a sponge and some Dawn dish soap before putting them in the dishwasher. Or let's just say you're doing it by hand, because some people say I have these amazing dishwashers, I don't have to worry about that. It's not meant to be that technical. It's meant to give you for instance, that you would use the sponge to get off the gunk, and then you do your sanitization process. Same thing with your harvest containers. You're going to remove the dirt and debris with a detergent, a scrubbing action, a rinse, and then applying a sanitizer. On our website, there are guides that walk you through this with visual assistance as well. A few other notes on that. Only use harvesting containers for produce. Don't put tools, equipment, chemicals, miscellaneous items in there. They should just be dedicated for produce. It saves you in the long run. Some examples of post-harvest pack sheds to show you don't have to get too complicated with it. That's a basic lean-to in the top left corner with the produce harvest area, wash bay. You can see the containers on a pallet off the ground. And the top right, that's how she's cleaning her containers. Prioritizing cleaning and sanitizing. The area you want to focus on is zone 1. So we're talking about anywhere the produce directly touches. So you can see the melons working on the conveyor, the grading table, and you can see the shields. Anywhere those melons are going to touch are what you want to focus on with the cleaning and sanitization process. Zone 2 is your next area of concern. It's the area immediately adjacent to zone 1. Zone 3 would be your indoors, your floors and indoor wall, and zone 4 would be the outside. All are important, but the focus should be zone 1, especially early on. For some producers, it is better for the producer not to wash. Typically, I highly encourage do not wash produce unless you absolutely have to. If you do absolutely have to wash produce because a customer is requesting it, the best way is a single pass system. You can get hardware cloth, stainless steel table. You set the produce on top, hook up a potable hose. So think of the ones you get for an RV. You can get them from Walmart, Amazon, Lowe's. They tend to be blue, white and blue. It will keep the water quality potable from the faucet to the distribution, whereas those cheap green hoses from China are not meant to be food grade and probably leach. There is a picture coming up that will show you that. A perfect example is if you look at the bottom right picture of the photo, if you're submerging produce to rinse it in there, take any kind of leafy green, cube, squash. If his hands are dirty or there was bird feces, deer feces, etc. on that commodity, the minute you put it in that hopper, it will spread that to all the produce. So you went from making one person sick to making everyone sick. If you use sanitizers in the wash water, which we're going to get to, that will help mitigate those risks. But as you can see, if you remove the water process, it's just better for you in the long run. Okay, your surfaces should be cleanable. In the top right corner here, you can kind of see this graded table. It's not ideal with the wood, but it's better than some of the alternatives. Typically, you just get stainless steel legs and put this hardware cloth in the middle. You put the produce on it, you rinse it down. If you're doing these 3-bay sinks, typically we get into some real specific examples, draw some stuff on the board, look at photos. I have not mastered Zoom yet, but the trick there would be using the sanitizer in all 3 bays. Because again, what sanitizer won't do is clean the contaminated produce. It will prevent the free-floating pathogens from contaminating all the produce. So if you don't have it in all the bays, you're not reducing the risk like you think you are. Cooling, it's important for food safety and quality. You can see the example up there at strawberries at 1 hour at field temp is the equivalent of 1 week at 32 degrees cool. Allow airflow between containers, cool down ASAP, and maintain the cold chain. Transporting, ideally, if you have livestock and do multi-purpose at your farm, how you're moving produce is not how you're moving manures, chemicals, livestock, meats, etc. If that is the case, I would highly encourage paint liners like the painter's plastic, some kind of barrier between when you're moving stuff that can contaminate produce to the fresh produce. Personnel, most people on this call work with produce, so you understand that you have a very intimate relationship with your plants and crops and that you handle them directly. If you don't take steps to inform any workers, volunteers, etc., of the risk and steps they need to take, you do put your consumers at risk. Having adequate training in hand washing facilities and teaching hand washing goes a long way. Really emphasizing with your workers and yourself that if you are sick, it is probably a good idea to not handle the fresh commodities. You can see the image. We tend to give these away at our worker trainings. There are very cheap ways to accomplish hand washing stations. When I build them, they're about $24. I just go on to US Plastic and get these 5-gallon containers that have a faucet style front where you can pull the lever down and the water stays running. I get 2 5-gallon buckets from Home Depot or Lowe's that are about $2.50 each. A little thing of soap and a little thing of paper towels on a paper towel holder. The whole setup runs you about $24, and then you can provide hand washing remotely in a field. That is a sound investment if getting to a bathroom at your house or wherever your designated break area is has logistical challenges. Again, here's the image for how to do it. And on our website, there's worker training guidance documents that if you just print it out, it will walk you through and provide the resources for completing worker training. And it gives you these little signs to be able to laminate and put or take with your portable field watching station. Record keeping for smaller growers who aren't interested in GAP certification, I focus more on practices than learning the record keeping. If your goal is to ultimately scale, it is always a good idea to start this early on because you'll build it into your operational flow. We have all the templates you could possibly need on our website. I took the ones I use at our farm and just made them generic for K-State and put the nice little logo on there. So you're welcome to build these from scratch or alter off existing templates that are available. A farm food safety plan will get you organized. We do workshops on this where we provide the template you need and you just customize it to your farm. The template itself already has the industry standard language that you should be following if you want to be GAP certified. Even if you don't want to be GAP certified, it's beneficial because walking through the food safety plan, it shows you what areas are addressed and how you mitigate the risk. So as a farmer, it will help you identify on your individual farm what you should be doing to have safe produce. Water sampling. In Kansas and Missouri, we're doing free testing. At Missouri, you can submit samples at your local public health department. Kansas, you can bring to Manhattan or after COVID to Olathe. On our website, there are directions and handouts for how to do this. Always reach out to where you're going to drop them off in advance and coordinate the logistics so you don't take the time to pull a sample, get it there, and find out that no one's there to be able to test it. It does have to be tested within 24 hours, is why coordination is a very important thing to do. Sanitary sampling, very important. If you could have very good clean water, but if you collect it poorly, then you're adding problems to your farm that you didn't have. Because when you get a bad sample, you can't just be, oh, shucks, and I'll just throw this out and start over. Once you have the test result, it's something you need to be keeping and then addressing your risks. There is a video on our website for how to sanitarily collect water. Here's our website. You can see at the top URL, but if you, like I said, if you just Google, I think Londa put it in the chat, Produce Safety K-State, it brings it up. It's broken down into different areas. GAPS is just, that's if you want to pass and just get good knowledge for audits. The food safety plan itself is the template, and then FSMA is if you're required under the rule. That's also where you'll find the video. So the next food safety plan training we're doing for Kansas and Missouri growers is May 4th, and it's going to be online via Zoom. FSMA, the full out produce safety training where you get the certificate, the national curriculum. We are doing one this Wednesday, but the registration for that is closed and we will be offering them in the future. Also, if you go to the Produce Safety Alliance at Cornell, they are doing that, offering it online on a 2-week recurring basis as long as the COVID's going on. That one's a little more intensive to do than the regular 1 day. So there's pros and cons to that. If you're a Kansas or Missouri grower and you are interested in getting GAP certified, we do have cost share funds paying half of your audit up to a certain amount. I do not have the amounts memorized off the top of my head, but I am sure Londa will chime that in here shortly. If you get questions and you're in Kansas, that is my cell and email. If you're in Missouri, your guy is Patrick Byers, and that is his info.